Sarah! David! Where are you? Please answer me!
Would you believe that the creature feared by the world was the reason a family survived a snowy night? In the winter of 1989, deep in the Bitterroot Mountains of Montana, a 7-year-old girl carried her baby brother through the snow, searching for help. Her mother lay unconscious in a broken-down car, and their only hope flickered like a cabin light in the distance. But what saved them first wasn't human. Each morning they found gifts: warm salmon, stacked firewood, and a flat stone shaped like a heart. And when a violent man came to burn everything down, that same shadow leapt through the flames to save them. Based on a story long hidden in a forgotten corner of Montana, only recently shared through an anonymous letter to a wildlife preservation group. This tale may challenge everything you think you know about Bigfoot. You'll discover why some believe Bigfoot isn't just real, but kind. How an old wood carver, a runaway mother, and 2 brave kids made peace with something the world refuses to understand. And the silent burial between 2 species as the rain fell and the forest held its breath. Hazel swears she saw it, smaller, gentler, with eyes like ours. And a year later, a carving appeared on their porch. 4 humans, and 1 tall figure standing quietly beside them. If you've ever felt there's more to this world than we can see, this story is for you. We'd love to know. Where are you watching from? How far can this story reach? Leave a comment to let us know, and send our warmest regards to your corner of the world. And if you believe kindness can come from the shadows, like this video, subscribe, and help us grow a community that believes Bigfoot might just be the forest's quiet guardian. A late autumn wind curled down from the peaks of the Bitterroot Mountains, sweeping past bare trees and rattling the last dead leaves clinging to their branches. The road that twisted through the pines was damp with melting frost, and the world outside smelled of wet bark, rust-colored leaves, and the silence of something watching. Inside the old Chevy, the heater had died miles ago. Bea Callahan kept her hands on the wheel, knuckles white, jaw tight. In the back seat, 7-year-old Hazel clutched baby Jessie tight to her chest, her small arms wrapped around the infant the way a child clutches a doll. Except this one breathed, whimpered, and radiated a heat she was desperately trying to protect. The windshield blurred under the wiper's worn rhythm, and beyond it, the road narrowed until it vanished into the fog. The radio had gone static an hour earlier. No signal, no help. Just the hum of the engine, ticking slower with every mile. She pulled over without meaning to. The car stuttered once, then went still. One last heartbeat. No more. Bea's breath clouded the air in front of her as she leaned back, whispering a prayer without sound. The scarf around Jessie's tiny body was all she had left to offer. She turned toward Hazel, voice barely audible. "Hold him close, baby. I just need to rest my eyes a moment." Hazel stared, blinking into her mother's tired face, not understanding. Bea touched her daughter's cheek with a shaking hand, then let her head fall against the seat. Her body slackened. She was still breathing, but not present. The kind of sleep you fall into when you're just too tired to keep going. Hazel didn't wait. She couldn't. She opened the door and the cold slapped her in the face like a warning. Wind pushed against her legs. Fog pressed in, thick and gray. But there was something else too. A faint glow up ahead, yellow and pulsing, like a lantern flickering behind the trees. Hazel tucked Jessie under her coat, zipped it as far as it would go, and stepped onto the road. Her shoes crunched wet gravel. The woods loomed taller with every step, branches stretching like fingers overhead. She didn't cry. She didn't call for help. She just followed the light. When the cabin came into view, it looked more like a shadow than a house. Logs blackened by years of wind, a rusted tin roof bent at the edges. Smoke did not rise from the chimney. The porch was crooked, the steps bowed in the middle. But the light was real, warm behind a small square window. Hazel stood still for a second. Then she knocked. 1, 2, 3 soft taps, barely more than a whisper against the old wood. Nothing. She waited. Knocked again. The door creaked open before she touched it again. An old man filled the frame, gray hair tousled, eyebrows like snow-dusted bark, hands strong but uncertain. Behind him, an old dog stepped forward, stiff in the joints, tail low but not afraid. Hazel didn't speak. She just turned, unzipped her coat, and showed him what she carried. Jessie, face flushed with cold, lips pale, eyes closed. The old man knelt in one motion faster than he should have been able to. He scooped Jessie into his arms, turned to Hazel, and with a single nod, ushered her inside. The door closed behind them with a long groaning sigh, like the forest itself was exhaling. Inside, the heat was slow in coming. The old man, Harlan Reddick, built the fire with practiced hands, stacking kindling with the precision of someone who'd done it alone for too long. A kettle went on the stove. Blankets were pulled from a cedar chest, worn and smelling of pine. He didn't speak much, just worked. In the light of the fire, Jessie's color began to return. Hazel watched every movement with the stillness of someone who had forgotten how to be a child. Later, when the house had quieted, Harlan stepped outside to fetch more wood. The forest was hushed but not empty. Snow hadn't started falling yet, but the air carried the promise of it, sharp, metallic. On the porch, beside the pile of chopped logs, something caught his eye. A mark in the frost. Not boot, not paw. Bigger, longer, 4 deep impressions like knuckles. Whatever it was had stood there, just outside the door, unmoving, watching. Harlan didn't speak, didn't shout. He simply stood a moment longer, hand tightening around the axe handle, and then stepped back inside. The door closed. The wind moved again through the trees, and out beyond the clearing, past the edge of where firelight reached, something exhaled. Long, deep, waiting. Back inside, the girl was curled beside her brother, head resting on her arm, breathing slow and steady. The fire crackled. The old dog stretched and settled at her feet, and in the silence that followed, a man who'd spent too long alone looked at the children now sleeping on his floor and realized the night had changed something in the world, though he didn't yet know what. Tomorrow would bring questions, but tonight, all that mattered was that the cold had not won, and something out there had helped make sure of that. Morning cracked through the pine branches in pale streaks, thin as breath on glass, slipping past the warped shutters and spilling over the wooden floor of the cabin. The stove still held a faint glow from the night before, coals buried beneath ash, warm enough that the chill didn't bite so sharply. Hazel blinked into the dim light, her arms curled around Jessie, who slept soundly on the folded wool blanket beneath them. Harlan was already up. The man moved quiet like the house had taught him how, boot steps soft on old floorboards, careful not to wake what little peace existed inside these walls. He had boiled water, brewed tea, and now sat hunched at the kitchen table, mending the frayed elbow of a small jacket with crooked fingers and waxed thread. Hazel didn't speak, just watched. When he noticed her, he didn't offer words. Instead, he stood, poured warm cocoa into a chipped mug, and set it on the edge of the table, followed by half a slice of bread with the crusts trimmed. It was enough. She nodded once. Her hands trembled as she lifted the cup. Harlan returned to stitching. Jessie stirred then, a little grunt escaping from deep sleep, and Harlan walked over without a word, draped one of his late wife's thick socks over the boy's toes, careful not to wake him. The socks were worn and patched but clean, and in this house, that meant something. Outside, the dog was already sitting by the door. Fletcher didn't growl, he didn't bark. He just stared into the trees, tail still, ears alert, nose twitching in small, thoughtful motions. Something had passed through, or stayed. Harlan opened the door a crack and stepped out. His boots sank slightly into the damp step. Frost was melting from the boards. He crouched to reach for the log pile and froze. A neat stack of dry wood, split clean, edges sharp, sat right where the night before had been empty. His own pile was untouched, but this one had been placed, arranged. 4 logs bound with twine, and a 5th resting across the top. He looked up, scanned the tree line. No sound but the whisper of wind through needles and Fletcher's low whine behind him. The man picked up the bundle, turned it slowly in his hands. It smelled like lichen and river rock. Damp, but not wet. He said nothing, just carried it in and laid it beside the hearth like it belonged there, like whoever left it had meant it to belong. Later, when the cabin had settled into a slow rhythm, Hazel wandered over to the front door and asked softly if she could go outside for a minute. Harlan nodded. She took an apple from the kitchen counter, one of the last few he had stored in the cellar, and walked out barefoot, toes curling against the porch wood. The sun had not yet warmed the earth, and her breath still hung in the air. She placed the apple gently on the top step. Not on the edge, not hidden, just there. A gift in return. She didn't wait, just turned and went back inside, closed the door, and curled up beside her brother. The day moved slow. Harlan fixed the loose hinge on the back door and oiled the hinges. Hazel napped. Jessie suckled from the last bottle of Formula B had packed, and Harlan made a note to ration what little was left. Toward dusk, when the sky began to burn orange behind the ridge, Hazel stirred and tiptoed back to the door. The apple was gone. In its place sat a stone, small, flat, the color of river clay. Its surface bore a single natural line, just one, curving smooth and faint, but unmistakable. A heart. Not carved, not etched, just there, as if time had brushed it into the stone and waited for someone to notice. Harlan stood behind her, silent. He reached down, took the stone, turned it over once in his palm. His eyes didn't blink for a long while. He remembered the box beneath his bed. Pinewood, handmade, never stained. Inside were a few things. An old locket, a brass button, and the wooden figurine he'd once started carving for his son the winter before the mine collapsed. It still had no face. He walked back inside and placed the stone inside the box, right next to the unfinished toy. Then he closed the lid and didn't speak for the rest of the evening. That night, when the wind picked up and the sky went deep indigo, Harlan moved through the cabin checking locks out of habit. The fire burned low but steady. Hazel had fallen asleep sitting upright, Jessie tucked against her side, his tiny hands curled in sleep. Fletcher lay at the front door again, ears perked but not alarmed. It was past midnight when it came. 3 knocks. Faint. Not on the door, not on the wall, on a tree. Somewhere out there in the dark. Wood met wood in 3 slow, deliberate thuds. Not angry, not rushed. Just enough to be heard by those who listened. Fletcher lifted his head. Hazel stirred. Harlan turned to the door but didn't open it. He placed his hand gently on the doorknob, held it there and said quietly, "Let it be." No one asked what it meant. No one needed to. The knocks didn't come again. In the morning, the woods smelled different. Not dangerous, just awake. Harlan followed the tree line a little farther than usual, careful not to leave prints too deep in the mud. The forest floor was disturbed in places. Twigs snapped in odd patterns, bits of moss missing from stones. But the thing that stayed with him most was a narrow path along the edge of the property. It wasn't visible unless you knew what to look for. A trail worn just enough to hint at passing feet. Too big for any known animal, too long between each print to be man. He crouched beside it, fingertips brushing the soil. Someone had walked here, more than once. Fletcher didn't bark. Instead, The dog sat at the edge of the clearing and gave one low, steady whine, long enough that Harlan turned. The old man stood there, his hand resting on the dog's back, eyes scanning the trees. There was no threat. Not now. But something had changed. Something had made itself known. He spent the afternoon quietly patching up Hazel's coat. The sleeve had been torn at the seam, probably weeks ago. His late wife's sewing tin still held buttons she'd collected over the years. He picked one, a red one, smooth with a marbled sheen, and sewed it in place. Not because it matched, but because it made the coat whole again. When Hazel saw it, she didn't speak. Just ran her fingers across the stitching, nodded once, and smiled without showing teeth. That evening, as they prepared a thin soup from canned beans and dry rice, Harlan pulled something from a drawer he hadn't opened in years. A small pocket knife with a dull edge and a handle smoothed from use. He handed it to Hazel carefully, told her it wasn't for playing, just for learning. They sat outside together for a while, carving notches into old pine twigs. Hazel wasn't good at it yet, but she didn't quit. The knife never cut her fingers, only peeled away the bark in shaky lines. The sky turned dark without them noticing. The wind died down, and just as they were about to go inside, Fletcher raised his head and let out a sound halfway between a growl and a groan. Not of warning, but of recognition. Harlan followed his gaze to the edge of the tree line. Nothing moved, not at first, but then, from the shadows, something shifted. A flicker of height, the brief outline of a shoulder broader than it should be. Hazel saw it too, her body freezing. Not with fear. Not this time. Just stillness, like a pause before breath. The figure didn't come closer. It just remained, watching, listening, aware. And then, slowly, it moved backward. Fading into the trees like fog at dawn, Harlan whispered, not to anyone in particular. It was here all along. Hazel stayed at the door for a long time after. Even after Jessie had been tucked in. Even after the fire was stoked. She stood on the porch with her arms crossed and stared at the trees. No tears, no words. Just quiet. Somewhere between the rustling of the needles and the creaking of the roof, she understood something that hadn't been taught. Not by her mother, not by Harlan, not by books, but by presence. That some silences are not empty. Some quiet means listening. And some beings, whatever name they go by, do not speak with mouths or letters. They speak with acts, with stones, with wood, with knocks in the night. And when she finally turned back inside, she left the door open just a little longer than she needed to. Just enough to say she noticed, and enough to say thank you. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above B. Callahan's head, a sterile kind of hum that pressed into her ears like cotton. She blinked against the white ceiling tiles, her vision swimming in and out until the details sharpened. Wall clock ticking at a rhythm too steady, a faded poster about child vaccinations curling at the corners, the smell of rubbing alcohol and hand soap thick in her nose. She tried to sit up, but her arms didn't obey, just trembled weakly as the blanket slipped from her shoulder. That's when the voice came. Not loud, not warm, but careful, like someone had spoken through years of seeing people who didn't want to be seen. "You don't have to rush," the woman said. Her uniform was pale green, sleeves rolled up to the elbow, hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun, skin lined but strong. Bee's lips parted, but her throat cracked dry. The nurse handed her a paper cup of water and waited. She didn't ask who Bee was or why she looked like she'd been dragged through the woods. She didn't reach for the clipboard, just placed a wrapped granola bar on the side table, followed by a folded map sketched in pen on a napkin. "North Trail hugs the ridge. Follow that past the first fork. He won't turn you away if you knock the right way." That was all she said before walking out. leaving behind the faint scent of peppermint and cigarettes. Bay didn't wait for the discharge papers. She slid from the bed, stiff-legged, the old bruises blooming across her ribs, and stuffed the granola bar and map into her coat. She moved like someone who knew how not to leave footprints, someone who'd trained herself to be invisible. Down the hall, the receptionist looked up, but Bea was already pushing through the exit. The cold outside slapped her harder than the light inside. She didn't flinch, just kept walking until the air smelled like dirt again, like leaves and fuel and something raw beneath her skin. She had $30 in her pocket, no phone, no ID. But she had her name, and her children. That was enough. The gas station at the edge of Darby still had a broken bell above the door. A man leaned against the counter, ball cap low, chewing sunflower seeds with the rhythm of someone who'd seen 100 strangers come and go. Bea asked for a bottle of water, a small bag of jerky, and a pack of gauze. When she reached into her coat, he didn't ask questions, just handed her the bag and gave her 4 crumpled ones back. She left as quietly as she entered, but someone had seen her. A truck idled near the dumpster, not the kind for hauling tools or groceries, not the kind that needed to be running. The man behind the wheel waited a beat, then grabbed the radio and said a few short words, like puzzle pieces meant to be assembled by someone else. The antenna clicked off. Down the road, parked near the edge of a gravel pull-off, Dane Kincaid tapped his knuckles against the steering wheel, watching the sun slide behind a line of trees. He looked ordinary. He liked looking ordinary. Soft flannel, clean shave, friendly eyes that turned sharp too quick. He'd already asked 3 shopkeepers and the old man who ran the diner about a woman traveling with 2 kids. Got the same look from each of them, the kind folks give when they don't want trouble but see it in your teeth. He leaned against the hood of the truck now, making idle talk with 2 men dressed in hunting gear too clean to be from any real hike. One carried a compound bow, the other a rifle with a dull black sling. They laughed too loud at nothing, the kind of men who like the sound of things breaking. When Dane mentioned the stories about the woods, about something big moving out there, one of them grinned like it was bait. "Big like bear?" he asked. "Bigger," Dane replied, eyes still scanning the tree line. "And smart." The other man spit into the dirt. "I ain't scared of stories." Dane didn't say anything after that. He didn't need to. Bea was already halfway back up the ridge by nightfall. Her legs ached. Her spine burned with every breath. But she didn't stop. The map had started to tear at the creases, ink smudged by sweat. The cold wrapped around her like a second skin. At one point, she thought she heard something behind her. Branches snapping low, steady footsteps too far apart to be human. She turned once. Nothing, just trees. A squirrel darted up a trunk. A crow shifted on a branch. Then silence again. She kept moving. When the lights from the cabin broke through the trees, they looked smaller than she remembered. Dimmer, but they were still there, still waiting. She stepped into the clearing just as a faint wind tugged at the edge of her coat. Hazel was standing on the porch, her small figure silhouetted by the orange glow from the window. She was holding Jessie in her arms like she hadn't moved in hours. When she saw her mother, she didn't shout. She didn't cry. She just nodded once and waited. Inside, the warmth made Bea stumble. Her knees buckled, but Harlan caught her before she hit the floor. He didn't ask questions either, just steadied her, guided her to the old chair near the stove, and brought her a tin mug filled with hot broth. Jessie's breath was shallow but warm. Hazel curled up beside her, refusing to let go. Fletcher watched from the door frame, ears flicking, tail still. The wind howled outside, but inside was steady, like breath after fear. Bea looked at Harlan. "Thank you," she said, barely louder than the fire's crackle. He just nodded, sat down across from her, and resumed whittling a small scrap of pine into something that looked almost like a hand. But the quiet didn't last. The next evening, lights swept through the trees. Unnatural, harsh beams that moved like searchlights across the clearing. The hum of an engine too new for these parts echoed between the pines. Then voices. Male. Sharp. Laughing without humor. Harlan stepped out onto the porch and saw the Jeep before the men. It rolled to a stop, headlights painting the cabin in cruel white. Dane stepped out first, followed by the two from town, now armed and eager. "Evenin'," Dane said like it was Sunday and they were neighbors. "Heard there was someone up here needed help." Harlan didn't move. His voice, when it came, was low and even. "You've got no right to be here." Dane smiled with all teeth. "Got as much right as anyone. These woods don't have fences." The air shifted then. Fletcher growled low. Hazel moved to stand beside Bee inside, who pressed Jessie close to her chest. One of the men behind Dane pulled something from his coat. A bottle. The flame flickered into life before anyone could stop it. It flew through the air in a lazy arc and shattered against the edge of the roof. Fire leapt from the dry wood, hungry and fast. The porch lit first, then the wall near the kitchen. Smoke billowed, thick and black. Then everything moved at once. A shape, huge, dark, fast, rushed from the shadows behind the cabin. It didn't roar. It didn't pause. It slammed into the Jeep, flipping it like a toy truck, glass bursting, metal shrieking. The men screamed, scattered. Fletcher barked once, sharp. Inside, Harlan grabbed Jessie and pushed Bee toward the back. Hazel stumbled but stayed close. The roof groaned. A beam cracked overhead. Fire licked down from the rafters. A heavy timber collapsed across the hallway. They were trapped. Then a hand appeared through the smoke. Not Harlan's, not human. It lifted the fallen beam like it weighed nothing. Reached in and pulled Harlan out, cradling the man like a child. Bee saw the outline. Broad shoulders, long arms, fur matted with soot and ash, the flicker of amber eyes in the firelight. It didn't speak, didn't stay. Just placed Harlan gently on the earth and turned back into the woods. Dane scrambled to his feet, blood streaking down his forehead, eyes wide with something new. Not fear, not exactly. More like awe twisted with shame. Harlan coughed, curled into himself, managed one word between gasps. Tower. No one argued. They ran. The fire behind them swallowed the cabin whole, the flames stretching upward like angry fingers. The Jeep was overturned, crushed on one side. The men didn't follow. Not right away. They lay on the ground, stunned, listening, and from deep in the woods, something watched. Not to strike, not to scare, just to make sure. That night, the forest held its breath. And somewhere, just past the reach of firelight, a shape stood between trees, watching the smoke rise into the stars. It did not move. It did not leave. It simply waited, patient as the mountain itself. The mountain didn't sleep that night. It held its breath under the thick scent of smoke and pine sap, branches dripping with dew from the heat of fire chased by cold wind. What was left of the cabin hissed in the darkness. Charred beams, glowing embers, pieces of a life burned through before it had a chance to be rebuilt. The old stovepipe clung to one side of the frame like a broken bone. The porch sagged in the middle where the steps had caved in. But there were no bodies. Only footprints in the damp earth, staggered and hurried, leading toward the high ridge trail. Harlan walked at the front, one arm tight around Jessie, the other gripping Bee's hand when the path narrowed. Hazel moved close behind them, her head ducked low, breath fogging quick and shallow in the cold air. Fletcher followed with ears low and tail stiff, every few steps glancing back the way they came, where smoke still lingered at the base of the trees. They didn't speak. No one asked how far. No one asked what next. They just moved uphill, step by step, until the slope curved and the forest thinned, and something like memory started to take shape through the trees. The old fire tower stood crooked on the hill like it had been left there by accident. the bottom steps soft with rot, the tin roof streaked with rust. Harlan had built it once, long ago, back when the town still paid for men to watch the trees and call in lightning strikes before they turned into disasters. He knew every board, every creak, and though time had taken the shine from it, the frame still held. The mountain had spared it, and now it stood waiting like an old friend who remembered your name even after you'd been gone too long. Inside, dust curled in lazy patterns. Shelves lined with old maps curled at the edges. A cot folded against the wall. The first aid box missing half its contents. But the roof didn't leak. And the windows still shut. That was enough. Bea lowered Jesse into the cot, brushed her fingers across his forehead. He slept like babies do when they've used up everything inside them. Hazel stood beside her, arms crossed tight against her chest. Her eyes kept drifting to the corner of the room where the shadows pooled. Quiet, steady, familiar. Harlan moved like he was back on a routine he hadn't needed in years. Checked the window locks. Shoved a chair against the door. Dug through the drawers until he found an old spiral notebook and a pencil worn down to the eraser. On the back cover was a drawing he'd made once. A map of the surrounding woods, not to scale, but marked with trails and places only the trees remembered. He circled a spot near the gorge. "There's a rock shelf," he said low. "Overhang deep enough to crawl under if we need to disappear." Bea nodded without looking up. That night, they ate cold beans from the can, and no one complained. Hazel shared a piece of dry granola with Fletcher. The dog didn't bark, just rested his chin on her knee and blinked slow like he understood more than anyone ever gave him credit for. Outside, the sky was the kind of black you only get far from town, when even the stars feel heavier than usual. And in that dark, things moved. Not close, not loud, but present. The rustle of limbs under weight too large for a deer. The crack of frost where no boots stepped. The faint smell of river moss and cedar sap carried uphill by wind that had passed through something that breathed. Bea didn't sleep much. She sat with her back to the wall, Jesse on her chest, heartbeat steady under his cheek. She thought of Dane, of the bottle of fire, the laughter, the look in his eyes. She remembered the cabin tipping into flame, the way wood screamed when it broke. But mostly, she remembered the hand. The massive hand that had pulled the beam aside. Not rough, not fast, but careful. She hadn't seen a face. Just the curve of the arm, the way the fingers curled, the space left behind when it stepped into shadow. She didn't tell Harlan. Not yet. She just held her son and waited for morning. It rained the next day. A slow, cold rain that came without warning. Harlan stepped outside to check the woodpile and found it untouched. The trail down to the creek was muddied, but not washed out. He followed it to the bend where the rock shelf cut across the gorge and checked the space beneath. Still dry, still hidden. A good place to run if it came to that. When he stood, he noticed something strange in the brush. Another apple. Not dropped, placed. No teeth marks, no rot. Just sitting there on a flat stone. And beside it, another rock, carved with 3 shallow lines like fingers. He picked it up, turned it in his hand, then looked to the trees. Fletcher whined behind him. Not scared, just alert. That night, Hazel stepped out onto the landing during a break in the storm. She held another apple, the last one from the bag. She walked to the edge of the tower, crouched low, and placed it on the railing. She looked into the woods and whispered a thank you. Voice so small the wind almost stole it. No one came, but the next morning the apple was gone. In its place, a single polished river stone. The children didn't play. Not really. But Hazel drew pictures in the dirt with sticks, circles, trees, stars. Once, she drew a large figure with long arms and a round head. Jesse reached out and smudged it before it was finished. She didn't redraw it. Bea finally told Harlan the story of what happened the night she drove off the road. About the water rising, the windows fogging over. The feeling of being pulled, not by rescue workers, not by chance, but by something larger than reason. A shape in the dark, breath warm against her neck, arms that held her but didn't crush. Harlan listened with his arms folded. Then he looked toward the trees. "It doesn't want to be seen," he said quietly, "but it wants to be known." They stood in silence for a while after that. The next evening Dane returned, this time not alone. He didn't come through the road but from the east, where the game trails wound up from the ravine. With him were the same 2 hunters, plus a third man. Older, hard-eyed, rifle slung low. They moved like they knew what they were looking for. Not people, not deer. Something bigger. They had traps, snares, bolts thick enough to pierce armor. From the tower, Fletcher growled low. Harlan spotted them just before dusk. He told Bee to pack what she could. Told Hazel to wear her boots. Told Jesse, though the boy was too young to understand, that they were going to play a very quiet game now. Then he pulled the trapdoor shut and nailed a blanket over the lowest window. They didn't run that night. Not yet. But the forest leaned in. The rain returned just after midnight, heavy, cold, unforgiving. Somewhere in the dark, a branch cracked, and far below, something cried out, not human, not animal, just sound, ripped from somewhere deep and hurting. Bee pressed Jessie tighter to her chest. Hazel looked to the door, and Harlan picked up the old hunting knife from the shelf, ran his thumb across the edge, and waited for whatever came next. Because something was coming, and it wasn't done yet. Rain came soft at first, barely more than mist sliding off the pine needles, brushing across the windows of the old fire tower like fingertips testing the strength of glass. But by mid-morning, the clouds had thickened into something meaner, grayer, heavy with weight they were tired of carrying. It wasn't long before the rain came full and slanted, slicing sideways through the trees, loud enough that it swallowed every other sound in the forest. It beat against the tin roof like 1,000 shoes running across metal. Inside the tower, the dim light flickered where water touched the lantern's edge. Jesse slept with his head curled into Bee's chest. Hazel sat by the window, drawing circles in the fogged glass, her eyes scanning the blur of trees like she expected someone, or something, to step forward from the curtain of rain. But nothing moved. Not at first. Harlan crouched over the desk in the far corner, unfolding an old topographic map he hadn't touched in years, fingers pressing creases flat. He marked the edge of the gorge, the trail they'd taken in the dark, the rock shelf beneath the overhang. That's where they'd go if the tower fell. No second chances. Just instinct. He glanced up toward the door, where Fletcher stood still as stone, body tense, ears low, tail unmoving. The dog hadn't relaxed since dawn. They had eaten what little was left. A few dry crackers, a quarter tin of green beans, and the last of the water Bee had carried up from the stream 2 days earlier. There was no firewood, no stove, just wet socks, wet clothes, and a heaviness in the air that felt less like weather and more like warning. Bee hadn't spoken since before sunrise. She stayed close to the children, every muscle locked in that quiet posture of someone ready to run again, if she had to. If she ever stopped. Hazel had tried once to whisper something, just a thank you, something simple. But Bee had only pulled her close and kissed the top of her head, breath catching in her throat. She wasn't cold. She was remembering. And sometimes that was worse. The first sign came late afternoon. The edge of the clearing below the tower showed a line of broken twigs, pushed down in the wrong direction. Not from wind, not from deer. Something had stepped there, slow and wide. Harlan saw it through the rain. Just a shift in the pattern of branches, a weight that didn't belong to wind. He didn't move, just whispered toward Bee, who didn't ask why. She scooped Jessie into her arms. Hazel pressed herself close, and Harlan lowered the trapdoor quietly into place. They waited. For a long time, the only sound was rain. and breathing. Then something snapped, clean and loud. A twig, close, not far. Fletcher growled low in his throat. The sound more like a warning to the wind than to a stranger. Harlan stepped toward the window, careful not to cast shadow. Outside, the tree line looked the same, but in the distance, maybe 50 yards off, where the trees dipped into a shallow ravine, something moved. Slow, too tall, too steady, not human, Hazel whispered. It's the same one, isn't it? Harlan didn't answer. Another moment passed. Then 3 sharp knocks echoed through the forest, wood against wood. Not angry, not frantic. Deliberate. 1, 2, 3. Hazel pressed her hand to the window. Bee pulled her back. Don't, she whispered. But Hazel didn't argue. She nodded once, sat down. They stayed that way, listening. The knocks didn't come again. But what came later was different. Harlan went out before first light the next morning, against his better judgment, against every rule that had kept him alive this long. But he had to check, had to see what was waiting near the tree line. Fletcher followed at his side, silent as ever. The rain had eased into fog, thick and curling low, a river of smoke between trunks. The forest felt empty and full at the same time. Just before the bend, near the split birch tree, Harlan saw it. A snare, wire wrapped tight between 2 low branches. Set high, too high for deer. The kind of trap meant for something that walked upright, freshly tied, coated in rain, hidden beneath a loose pile of pine needles. Harlan cursed under his breath and moved slower now. 10 feet later, he found another. Then another. Some were old style, jaws with metal teeth that snapped when triggered. Others were more precise, with weights and counterbalances. Whoever placed them knew what they were doing. He turned back fast, Fletcher pacing beside him, every hair on the dog's back stiff. Inside the tower, he pulled Bee aside. They're not just looking for us anymore, he said. They're hunting something else. Bea didn't need to ask what. Hazel stepped forward. The apple, she said. The one I left. It was gone, but they're putting traps out now. They're not leaving anything. Harlan nodded. They're trying to catch what they don't understand. The rain came back harder that afternoon. Wind pushed against the walls of the tower, howled through the gaps in the shutters like it was begging to get in. Inside, they wrapped the kids in blankets and whispered stories to keep them from asking questions. But their voices were small, and the wind was loud. It was near dusk when Hazel disappeared. No one saw her slip away. She left the door half closed, the storm covering the sound of her boots in the grass. She carried another apple, cradled in both hands like something sacred. She didn't go far, just to the base of the hill where the first tree opened wide near the trail. She placed the apple on the same stone she'd used days before. Then she waited. 10 minutes, maybe 20. Then something shifted in the fog. Another shape, smaller than the one she'd seen before. Not a full-grown giant, not the one who'd flipped the Jeep. This one was leaner, slighter. It moved with hesitation, every step like it expected to be watched. Hazel stood still. The shape paused. 2 yellow eyes blinked once through the mist. Then it stepped forward, slowly. It didn't touch the apple, just looked at it. Then at her, then back. Then something cracked behind them. A rope snapped. A rustle broke across the clearing. Hazel turned just as the shape flinched backward. Too late. A wire whipped from the side, catching air where it had just stood. The smaller creature darted left, vanished into the trees. Hazel screamed, turned to run. And Harlan was already there. He grabbed her, shielded her, pulled her back toward the tower, heart pounding like thunder inside her ears. At the edge of the clearing, in the trees beyond, something larger stood behind the mist, watching. Fletcher stopped dead, ears back. The wind dropped suddenly, like even nature had quieted. Harlan whispered without turning. Go inside. Hazel obeyed. Inside the tower, they huddled in silence. Bee held Jessie tight. Hazel pressed her hand to her chest. Harlan stood at the door, shoulders tense. Then, soft and low, 3 knocks echoed again. Not far, not close, just there. They didn't move, not until morning. When they finally stepped outside, the traps were gone. All of them, pulled clean from the ground, wires snapped, teeth bent, laid in a pile at the center of the clearing, coiled like dead snakes. Beside them, another stone, this one different. Flat, yes, but carved this time. A symbol, something like a tree, something like a family. And beside it, the apple, untouched. The storm broke around midday, not gently this time, not like the quiet rains that had passed before. This one came down hard and sure, like the sky had made up its mind to press the world clean. Sheets of water pelted the mountainside, turning the narrow footpaths to slick mud rivers and pulling bark from trees in strips. The fire tower groaned beneath the weight of wind, the walls breathing with each gust like the whole place might come undone if the mountain stopped holding its breath. The fog returned too, rolling thick between trunks, swallowing distance, making everything feel closer than it was. The kind of fog that whispered just outside your line of sight. Inside, everything was damp. The floor, the blankets, the sleeves of Bee's coat where she'd tried to cover Jesse's face from the worst of the cold. He was burning up now, cheeks red, skin hot and dry. He whimpered in his sleep, a thin sound like a wire vibrating. Harlan had propped the boy up against his chest, using his own body as insulation, whispering low words not to calm Jesse, but to keep himself steady. Bea sat beside them, arms wrapped tight across her belly. She hadn't spoken in hours. Her face had gone the same pale color as the light slipping under the door. Hazel sat near the window, knees pulled to her chest, watching the forest with wide, unblinking eyes. Every now and then she'd reach for the fogged glass, clear a patch with her sleeve, then sit back down. Fletcher stood between her and the door like a sentinel, head low, legs locked, muscles twitching with each sound of snapping limbs outside. No one had slept the night before. Not really. After the traps were found piled like bones in a warning circle, after the rain came again and washed away even the scent of who or what had left them there, no one asked what the next step was. They were beyond plans now. They were inside something that had already started without their permission. Something watching, choosing, protecting maybe, but never promising. Harlan had woken in the dark with a single thought in his head. The map. The old one. The hand-drawn lines he'd traced as a younger man, back when the tower still had a working radio and the trail markers hadn't rotted off their trees. He'd found it behind the stove, curled in dust and mold. And it showed something he'd forgotten. An old game trail that dipped behind the gorge and ran up beneath a limestone shelf, where the rock bent down low enough to make a roof. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. And more important, it was invisible from the ridge. If the storm kept the others from moving fast, it could buy them a day. He pulled Bea aside. "We have to move," he said, voice barely louder than the rain on the roof. "Today, before they figure out where the path splits." Bea nodded slowly. Her eyes met his and didn't look away. They packed everything they had. 3 dry blankets, half a canteen, the last tin of peaches. Harlan folded the map, slipped it into his chest pocket. Hazel carried Jessie at first, arms wrapped firm around her brother, his cheek pressed against her collarbone. Harlan took him when the slope got steep. Fletcher ran ahead, never straying far, circling back every few minutes like a scout that didn't trust what it had seen. By afternoon, the path narrowed and dipped, mud sucking at their boots. Trees thinned in strange ways here, growing sideways from the rock like they'd been pushed out of place. Bea stumbled once, caught herself on a low branch. When she looked down, her hand came away streaked with reddish clay and something darker. Not blood, not paint. Just something that hadn't been disturbed in a long time. Harlan saw it too. He didn't speak, just moved faster. It was Hazel who heard the noise first. a dry crack behind them, too clean, too sharp to be from rain. She turned, eyes scanning the fog, and saw movement. Shapes, half swallowed by mist. Men, at least 3. One carrying something long, another with a flashlight that barely pierced the gray. They were coming. Harlan grabbed her wrist, pulled her behind him. "Run!" he said. They didn't argue. The trail dipped hard into a gully then, a shallow creek bed now rushing with rainwater. Harlan waded in first, boots disappearing under brown currents, arms raised to keep Jessie dry. Fletcher barked once, a sound that split the quiet like a flare, then turned and lunged at the figure just appearing through the trees. The man fell back with a shout. Fletcher didn't bite, just blocked the path long enough for the others to reach the far side of the creek. When the dog finally turned and followed, his coat was streaked with mud, tail stiff. The limestone shelf appeared almost by accident, just a low shadow against the side of the mountain, hidden behind a curtain of cedar. Inside, it was barely taller than a man, the floor uneven, the air damp with mineral smell and the soft drip of water down stone. But it was dry and hidden, and enough. They collapsed inside. Hazel dropped to her knees. Bee crawled to the far wall, pulled Jessie from Harlan's arms and pressed him against her chest. Harlan crouched by the entrance, blade drawn, breathing fast but even. Then they heard it. Footsteps, slower now, cautious. A voice, not loud, but close. "Don't run. You don't have to run." It was Dane. "You got something with you. We don't want the kids, just the thing in the woods." No one answered. The footsteps stopped. A pause. Then a whisper, barely audible through the rain. "Come on out. We ain't the bad guys here." Still no answer. Then something else moved. Faster, heavier, behind them, on the ridge. Not boots. Not human. A shape blurred past the entrance. Large, hunched, moving like wind, but with weight enough to shake the trees. Then another, smaller, closer, just outside the cave. Bee pulled Jessie tighter. Hazel held her breath. Harlan didn't move. In the clearing just out of sight, the air changed. A sound like branches tearing. A cry, short, sharp, not human. Then gunfire. 3 shots. 2 fast, one dragged out like someone was surprised. Then silence. Not even rain, just silence. Minutes passed. Then Fletcher barked again, soft this time, like a question. Bee crawled forward, looked out. At the edge of the trail, in the clearing just beyond the fallen log, stood a tall figure. Broad, covered in dark hair soaked through from rain. One hand pressed against its ribs, the other outstretched. Behind it, another smaller figure, leaner, eyes wide, breath visible in the cold. They didn't come closer. They just stood there, watching, waiting. Then the larger one nodded, a slow, deliberate nod, and turned away. The smaller one followed. They vanished into the trees. Bee exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. Later, Harlan stepped into the clearing. Dane was lying beside the stream, one leg twisted awkward, gun missing. The other men were gone. Blood soaked the leaves. Not much, but enough. Harlan knelt beside him, checked his pulse, still alive. He tore a strip from his own sleeve and wrapped it around the man's thigh, tied it tight. When Dane came to, he stared at the sky, eyes unfocused. "That thing, it could have killed me." Harlan didn't say a word. Dane blinked, swallowed hard. "It didn't." "No," Harlan said. "It didn't." Then he stood and walked back toward the cave. The rain had eased. The fog began to lift, and from somewhere deeper in the forest, 3 quiet knocks echoed through the trees. Not threat, not warning, just presence and promise. Under a sky bleached by high summer light, the mountain seemed to breathe easier. The air was no longer thick with rain, but warm and clean, washed by the storms that had passed days before. It smelled of pine needles baking in the sun, dry stone, and wild mint crushed beneath boots. From the ridge, you could see far now, past the tree line, down the winding trails that cut through Bitterroot like old scars. The forest was quiet in that particular way it gets after something has gone wrong and then right again, as if the land itself needed a pause to exhale. And in that silence, people began to return to the rhythm of living. Harlan stood beside the remains of his old cabin. Boots dug into the damp soil, shirt sleeves rolled past the elbow. He held a hammer in one hand, a length of reclaimed board in the other, his body casting a narrow shadow across the charred foundation. The original frame was long gone, but not everything had been lost to the fire. Some of the floorboards had held. The stove door still hung from one hinge. Even the front step, scorched but intact, remained where it had always been, like a memory that wouldn't burn. Bay crouched nearby, her hands brushing away leaves and ash as she cleared a corner for the new foundation. Her face was leaner now, older in a way that wasn't about time, but distance. She moved with a kind of slow certainty, the quiet muscle memory of someone who'd survived something without knowing if they ever would. Her eyes tracked Hazel and Jesse as they played near the edge of the brush, stacking small rocks and drawing circles in the dirt with sticks. Jesse had grown stronger in the past few days. His fever had broken after the rains passed, his laugh now bright and sharp as the creek just beyond the rise. They weren't alone. That morning, Cora Dean had hiked the ridge trail with a woven basket swinging from her arm, her steps steadier than most folks half her age. She brought bread wrapped in linen, a jar of canned peaches, and an envelope marked with heavy pen strokes. Inside were 3 folded sheets of paper, petitions from the townsfolk, each signed in their own script. They read like prayers disguised as policy, requests to restrict hunting permits in the upper woods, to designate the surrounding forest as protected wilderness. But beneath the legalese was something simpler, a collective breath of gratitude, etched in ink and humility. "We owe something to what's out here," she said, eyes glancing toward the trees. "Whether we name it or not." Harlan nodded once. He didn't need to say anything more. Fletcher rested beneath the porch beams, tongue lolling, ears flicking at every fly that came too close. He'd taken to lying in the shade and watching the children like it was a job he'd been born for. Every now and then, he'd lift his head sharply, eyes tracking some invisible motion beyond the clearing. But he didn't bark anymore. Just watched, like he knew the woods had changed. Later that afternoon, as Harlan nailed the last support beam into place, a jeep rolled into view from the far bend in the trail. The tires crunched soft dirt, the engine clicking as it cooled. Dane stepped out slowly, both hands visible, no weapons, no smirk. His arm was still wrapped from the fall, now in a clean bandage, taped neat along the edges. He looked thinner too, like something had been taken out of him that he hadn't wanted to lose. He walked halfway to the porch before stopping. "Came to say I'm going," he said, voice low, stripped of its old slickness. "They dropped the big charges. Town says I can help fix the road crew for the next 6 months. Better than jail, I guess." Harlan stood still. Dane looked down, then back up. "You didn't have to pull me out. I know that." "You're right," Harlan said, setting the hammer down. Dane nodded once. "Well, thanks anyway." Then he turned and left. No fanfare, no more words. The jeep rolled away, the trees closed behind it. That evening, just before supper, Bea found something resting on the rebuilt porch. It hadn't been there an hour earlier. A carved piece of wood, unfinished, unpainted, still rough in spots. It showed 4 small figures, shaped with simple knife marks. A man, a woman, 2 children. And beside them, standing just off to the side, was a 5th form. Taller, broader, shoulders slightly turned like it was watching the door. No face, no eyes. Just the suggestion of protection, solid and silent. Hazel picked it up and turned it over in her hands. "Was it you?" she asked no one. No one answered. The wind moved through the trees like breath. She placed the carving beside the front step, not inside. not hidden, just there. That night, the air was warm and dry, filled with the kind of stillness that makes you think maybe everything is waiting. Harlan sat on the new steps, sipping something dark from a chipped tin cup. Bay leaned against the doorway, arms folded, watching the moon slip through the trees. Hazel was asleep in the loft with Jessie tucked against her side, the blankets pulled to their chins, their breath rising and falling in tandem like waves. Cora's letters sat on the table inside, the signatures curling at the corners. Someone had added a small note at the bottom in scratchy pencil. Maybe the woods knew we were watching. Maybe now we should try listening. Sometime after midnight, Fletcher rose quietly and walked to the edge of the clearing. He didn't growl, just sat, ears forward, still. 3 knocks, soft, low, from far off, or maybe close. No one stirred, but Harlan heard. He stood slowly, eyes fixed on the trees, the night stretching out around him like an old coat finally fitting right. He whispered, not to the woods, but to whatever might have been listening from the start. We're not going anywhere. And the forest, in its own way, seemed to nod back. By the time the leaves started to fall again, the forest had changed its rhythm. Not in loud ways, not in any way most folks would notice from the outside. But if you lived in it, if you listened with your chest instead of your ears, you'd feel it. The wind carried different notes. The trees creaked a little slower. The mornings were colder, but not unkind. 1 year had passed since the fire, since the rain, since 3 knocks in the night shifted something no law could ever name. And now, the mountain remembered. The cabin stood again. Not new, not polished, but honest. Pine boards hand-fitted, windows cut smaller to hold heat, roof angled just enough to let snow slide off easy. Inside, it smelled of smoke and cinnamon, warm quilts, and cedar shavings from Harlan's workshop. The porch creaked when you stepped on the second board. The front door stuck slightly in the mornings until the sun warmed the hinges. It wasn't perfect, but it held. Hazel had grown. She moved different now, longer limbs, more sure-footed. Her hands were calloused from carrying wood, from helping Harlan split kindling, from writing careful instructions on the chalkboard Bea had nailed to the cabin wall for lessons. She could name every tree within half a mile, knew where the wild strawberries grew late in the season, knew when the water in the creek was too fast to cross barefoot. Some afternoons, you'd find her sitting with Fletcher beneath the red maple out back, reading out loud to no one in particular. Sometimes Jessie would nap in her lap. Other times he'd run barefoot through the dirt, clutching a stick like a sword and yelling things that made no sense but still carried weight, like a boy who'd fought dragons no one else had seen. Bea had started baking again. Not often. Ingredients were still rationed. Flour didn't come easy. But she made biscuits when the weather turned and pies when the mood struck. She taught Hazel how to test the dough by feel. Jessie sat on the counter most days, dusted in flour, licking batter off the spoon. There was laughter again. Not constant, but enough. Harlan kept busy. The new workbench outside caught sun most of the afternoon. He carved slowly these days, no rush, no deadlines. Just shapes that came to him in the grain of wood. Some became toys, some became tools. Others, those he didn't show many people, were figures. Rough, silent, tall. He never sanded them smooth. Said they were better honest. He opened a small corner of the porch to any kid from the nearby valley willing to learn. Some came on weekends. Others stayed for the day. He taught them how to sharpen a blade, how to listen to the trees before stepping off trail, how to leave an offering when you take something you didn't plant. Most listened. Some just came for the stories. But none left the same. The town had changed too, subtly but surely. There were new signs at the trailheads now. Not warnings, not the kind that scared folks off. Just reminders. Small wooden plaques with simple rules. No fires during dry spells. No rifles beyond the third ridge. Leave stones where you find them. Respect what doesn't speak. Cora Dean had helped draft the wording. She delivered it with warm bread and a wink, and half the town had signed off before the ink dried. Even the mayor, who didn't quite believe the stories, had agreed it couldn't hurt. The game wardens came once, months ago, asking questions. Quiet questions. Polite. One of them, young, nervous, stood in the clearing for a long time, hat in his hand, eyes scanning the trees like they might speak. Then he nodded at something only he saw and told Harlan he had no more questions. Dane had disappeared, not in a sinister way. He just didn't come back. Some folks said he moved east. Others said he worked on a trail crew in Oregon now. Hazel asked once. Harlan said people find their own ways to carry shame. Some run from it, some learn to hold it better. The forest, though, that was what stayed and spoke. Hazel heard it clearest. She said it was like breath under moss, like footsteps you couldn't see but always felt. Some nights, when the wind bent just right, she'd hear the rhythm again. 3 soft knocks. Sometimes close, sometimes farther off. She never feared it. She'd just listen, then whisper goodnight into the dark. One late October evening, as the light turned gold across the hills, Hazel walked out alone. She carried a red apple in one hand, a worn scarf tied around her neck. She didn't tell Bea where she was going. She didn't have to. The path was familiar now, worn into the ground not by boots, but by memory. Past the fire pit, over the bend where Fletcher had once barked into fog, down to the flat stone where she'd left her first gift. She set the apple down gently, waited, longer than before. Then, from the tree line, a shape stepped forward. Small, narrow, quiet. It was the young one. The one who had once stood between her and the traps. The one with eyes the color of warm river stones. Its fur was thicker now, the outline broader. But it didn't come close. It only watched. Hazel didn't move. Then it did something new. It raised one arm, slow, deliberate, palm open, like a wave. Hazel mirrored it. She didn't smile, didn't cry, just stood still, the air between them holding something deeper than words. Then the figure turned, stepped back into the trees, vanished without sound. Hazel waited another moment, then turned too. As she reached the porch, Bea was lighting the lantern. Harlan stood beside the wood pile, knife in one hand, carving something thin and simple. Hazel walked past them, into the warmth. No one asked. The silence had said enough. That night a strong wind rose. It howled through the trees but never touched the cabin. Inside, the fire popped gently. Jesse snored from his cot in the corner. Fletcher lifted his head once, blinked, then settled again. Harlan stepped out onto the porch with a candle. He placed it on the railing, shielded from the wind, then sat and waited for a moment. Then it came, soft and sure. 3 knocks. Not loud, not near, but exactly where they needed to be. He whispered, not like a prayer but like a promise. We remember. And the mountain listened. Some stories aren't meant to be shouted. They live best in the quiet, in the hush between trees, in the hush after grief, in the hush that follows when someone chooses kindness over fear. And maybe that's all this was. A story not about answers, but about how we carry each other when the world gets too heavy to hold alone. It's easy to believe the forest is just trees, just shadows, just silence. But sometimes the things we call wild are the first to notice when something's broken. And sometimes what doesn't speak in words still speaks in gestures. A hand offered, a gift returned, a knock in the night that means, I see you. I haven't forgotten. In the end, it was never about what lived out there in the woods. It was about what wakes up in us when we stop trying to control what we don't understand. About the small, quiet ways people can heal, if they're given time. About how trust isn't something you earn by force. It's something you offer, without asking for anything back. And how maybe, just maybe, family isn't who you're born to. It's who shows up when the world is cold. Who watches over you from the edge of the dark, who stays even when there's no reason left to. Because some debts aren't paid in money, some are paid in mercy, and the forest remembers mercy. If this story found a way to settle quietly in your heart, thank you for walking this path with us. If it stirred something in you, grief, hope, wonder, we'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments. Let us know where in the world you're watching from. Share this with someone who needs a little light. And if you haven't already, feel free to subscribe so you don't miss the next story we bring from the shadows into the firelight. Until then, stay kind, stay curious, and remember, sometimes the ones we fear the most are the ones who came to protect us all along.